Hello everybody, welcome to Weekly Tech. How are you all? Today in this lecture, we are going to discuss about closures. Closures in JavaScript. So the points and the topics that we are going to cover in this video are what are closures, what are practical closures, some practical example of closures, emulating private methods with closures is the most important point here in this lecture, and the performance considerations. So if you want to know about how closures can increase and decrease the performance and where to use it actually, or whether they're actually beneficial or not, or just for the sake of uh, to enhance or just to show off some features of JavaScript, the closures were introduced. So we have this kind of questions in our mind before, and if you have this kind of questions that where to use the closures and the practical benefits of closure, then you are at the right place. Stay here with me. In the next coming 4 to 5 minutes, we are going to discuss about closures and their benefits. So, what are closures? Let me just firstly tell you. Let me just quickly create a file, one JavaScript file, and I'll show you what are closures. So, theoretical definition of closure is a closure is a combination of functions bundled together or enclosed, bundled and enclosed together with reference to a surrounding state. In other words, a closure gives you access to the outer function scope from an inner function. So it's just like closure is a function inside function, and the inside function will have access to the outside function of the variables and of the functions, whatever that is in there in the outside function. So the inner function, the innermost function of a closure shares three kind of scope. One, let me tell you with an example. So let me just create a simple closure for you. Let my closure equal to name. Please note I'm using the arrow functions here. Return, or let's say I won't return. I'll call the functions here. Display name. Console.log name, and I'll call the function here itself. The display name, I'll call it here. So let me just call it before it. Let me just open my terminal, and before going to run this, let me just increase my font size. Let me just increase my font size. Okay, I have increased it, so hope it is clearly visible to you. So let me just clear my terminal, and I'm using Node.js. Node.js is nothing but a JavaScript runtime environment, and I'll cover the detailed explanations and points of Node.js in the coming videos. Here we are discussing only about JavaScript basics, and in the coming feature we'll discuss about Node.js. So let me just try to run it quickly. Oh, I need to call this with it's a silly mistake that I forgot when I was increasing the font size. So here what happened, I just called a function, and that function is having a function inside it. I'm calling that function again it from here. So the function, this function display name, so this is a classical example of closure, a simple yet very elegant example of closure. So this display name function is having access to three scope. One is its own scope. Whatever I declare inside this, it's having the access to that variable. Whatever I declare inside my closure function, display name will have access to that variable also. And what the first one is its own scope. The next one is the scope of my closure, the lexical scope, we call it lexical scope, and the scope which is global, that is the global scope. So Point to remember here is display name will have access to 3 scopes here. Now let me just give you a more prominent example to you that will look good to you, good in understanding it. Let me just create a new function and I'll call it an adder function. So the requirement of the function is let me just tell it to you. I'll make my adder uh, make adder, and that function will receive a base number, and based on that base number I'll add it to the required number. Okay, so let me just make another function. Well, I'll simply we can do it return. I can type it in 3 different ways, but just to let you guys understand, I'll type it in the next possible good way, and then I'll manipulate it to make it look good. So I'll return a function here, and this function will hold the add number, and what I'll do inside it is will simply um, console.log, or I'll simply return it, and I'll capture it on the console.log when I'm calling it. So return base num plus add num. Now, or for your own, let me just declare it like this: function add num func. Okay, so right now what we are doing here is, and let me just call it. Okay, and then I'll make you, then we'll discuss it more. So let add 10. I'll call make addr 10. So whatever, when I will call add 10, so whatever function value I'll pass inside add 10. So what add 10 will hold here? I have called make adder here, and make adder will return a function, and this function will be add num func, and this function will hold or will want this add num value. So when this add 10 will hold an instance of this add num function. So when I just call it console.log add 10, and I'll pass, let's say, 3, so it will add 3 to the base 10. So every time when I call a new it with a new value, it will give me every time a new value. So I told you guys the idiomatic way to write it is not this way. We can use arrow function and still it will work. We can use it like this and it will work. Let me show it to you. See, it's working. But the best way to write it is to the arrow functions is like when you have only one argument, you can remove this bracket. But I'm using prettier here, and prettier is by default adding it here for me. But what you can do is you can remove these quotes when you have only one value and one operation to do. So what you can simply do is you can also remove this return and this return also, because you have only one line and the first line will be returned automatically, and your new function will look like this. So base num will be passed to this inside function. I know it is looking a bit hard to understand, but that's why I have started with a way to understand it clearly, and then I changed it. So if you run it, it will give you the same output, but the number of lines have been reduced, and it's looking good. So coming to the next point, what are the practical examples and where we can actually use closures. So closures are useful because they let you associate the data with a function that operates on that data. Closures will let you work on a data. Closures will let you work on that data, base them, with a function that operates on that data. With a function that operates on that data. Clear? So consequently, you can use a closure anywhere that you might normally use an object with only a single method. So on the other words, to be on the easier side, there are situations where you might to do this, like you need to use a function the same way many places. For instance, let's have a front end example. So most of the time, much of the code written in front end JavaScript is event based. So you define some behavior and then attach it to an event that is triggered by the user, such as click or a key press. The code is attached as a callback. Whatever code that you write after an event, that is attached as a callback. A single function. Callback is nothing but a single function that is executed in response to an event. Let's say the event is on click and you want to execute a function. So it's just a callback. For instance, let me just create a new file here, new HTML file, next.html, and let me just write a few HTML lines quickly. And this, the title will have closures, and the body. Let me declare. Just switch off the terminal and let me just declare some p tags, or some heading 1, 3, and some anchor tags. Reference I don't need, ID I want. Let's say size 22, and the value it will hold is 22. So the requirement here is to have a link or a button or input value, which when we click it, it will increase the size of the overall body. So you can do it in CSS way, and you can increase it by your own, but when you want to use it on click, you need to use JavaScript. So let me just create a script tag. I'll create it here, and I'll let me just declare a size maker. So what this function will have, this will pass a size to this function, and what this function will do, it will return a new function which will give us the value of the style property or the document dot body to access the whole body of the document of the HTML dot style dot, and the property in which we are interested is the font size. And what it will do, it will use a size plus add a px after it. It will return a function. Why it is returning a function, let me tell it to you. So the next part is to create a function based on our requirement. So let's say we want size 22. So I'll simply call this closure size maker, and I'll pass 24 or 22. I'll pass, and I'll copy it. I have 24, I have 26 px. And remember from the previous example, this size 22, size 24, 26 will hold a function which will execute only this part, and that is what we'll need. Okay, so let me just use the JavaScript method to handle the click event. Document.get element by ID. The element name will be size 22, and I want it to be in quotes once again. you don't do this mistake. I generally do it. Not on click. The method will be on click, and on click the function or the callback. As we discussed earlier, JavaScript frontend is a result of everything. Most of the things in JavaScript is a result of an event, and this is the case at frontend. The event here is on click, and on click you want to execute a function that will be size 22, because size 22 will hold a function that has been written by the size maker here. So on click is an event, and this is nothing but a callback. After the event, call a function. So same we want to do with the rest of the IDs. The ID is 24 and the ID is 26, and the function that I'm interested is in 24 and 26. Let me just save this document for you. Let me just copy the absolute path. Let me just open a new Chrome terminal. And I'll paste the link over here. So when I click on 22, it will increase the font size. When I click on 24, it will increase it more, and when 26, it will increase it more. I'll again refresh it, 22, 24, 26. So here it's a classic example of closures. Every time we need it, and we can call it by using the size maker. The next example that I want to give you to have more understanding of closure is our next topic, that emulating private methods with closure, and that we'll cover in our next part, just to make sure that the video is not getting larger and bigger for you guys. And thank you for your time. Please hit the like button, and please do subscribe and share it with your friends. This is a new channel and new series on basics of JavaScript. Let me know your suggestions, and if you need some other topics to be covered in the future videos. Thanks a lot.